You already take magnesium. Smart move. But here's the thing. Not all Mag-Gly is created equal. Solaray's magnesium glycinate is fully chelated, never blended or buffered. That means it's actually designed for optimal absorption and gentle digestion. If you're ready to upgrade your muscle, bone, and relaxation support, choose a quality Mag-Gly that's perfectly chelated for ultimate absorption. Shop Solaray Magnesium Glycinate on Amazon or solaray.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. By the spring of 1918, the war in Europe had been grinding for nearly 4 years. 4 years of trenches, 4 years of mud and gas and wire. The French army had mutinied. The Russians had collapsed entirely and withdrawn from the war. The British were exhausted, their reserves thinning, and their generals quietly calculating how much longer they could hold the Western Front together. Germany, sensing its window, launched a series of massive offensives. Operation Michael, the largest assault since the war began, and for a terrifying few weeks, it all looked as though the Allied line might actually break. And then something happened that no military strategist in 1914 could have predicted. 2 million American soldiers finally arrived. Today's History Brief will cover some recent history news. A quick word from our sponsors.
I've got Dan Morgan here on the pod. Say hi, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
It's going good, man. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Dan Morgan. I'm an attorney and a managing partner at Morgan & Morgan, which is America's largest injury law firm.
That's pretty awesome. I think I saw a billboard of yours recently that said 20 billion won. 20 billion is an insane number.
Yeah, 20 billion recovered. It's actually, I think, somewhere north, probably closer to 22, 23 after this year. And each year we get bigger and badder and our army grows. So the number will hopefully keep getting bigger and bigger as time goes on.
Awesome. So how does someone get in contact with Morgan & Morgan? What would I do if I got into an accident?
Probably the easiest way is dialing pound law. That's pound 529 from your cell phone. We are always open. Our call center is always waiting to take your call. 24/7, 365.
Wow. Dan Morgan from Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Thanks for coming by the show.
Thanks for having me.
Visit forthepeople.com for an office near you.
This day in history. On March 23, 1775, Patrick Henry delivered one of the most famous speeches of the American Revolution at the Virginia Convention, declaring, "Give me liberty or give me death." His words electrified the colonial cause and helped push Virginia toward armed resistance against Britain. On March 23, 1983, President Ronald Reagan announced the Strategic Defensive Initiative, a proposed missile defensive system designed to intercept nuclear weapons in space. Though controversial and technically ambitious, the program symbolized the high-tech anxieties of the Cold War. Story of the day. To get this out of the way, the Allies in 1918 were really close to a collapse. No, but really. The entry of the United States into the war in April of 1917 had been celebrated in London and Paris, but celebration and relief are very different things. What the Allies needed wasn't moral support. They needed bodies. They needed fresh soldiers to replace the hundreds of thousands who had been killed, wounded, or broken by years of attritional warfare that had consumed an entire generation of European men. The problem was that America, in April of 1917, had almost no army to speak of. The United States Army numbered fewer than 130,000 regular soldiers at the time of the declaration of war. It had no experience of industrial-scale combat, no mass mobilization infrastructure, no doctrine for fighting the kind of war that had been consuming Europe since 1914. Building the force that would eventually become the AEF, ultimately more than 2 million men, required a military draft, an industrial mobilization, a training program, and a transatlantic logistics operation of staggering complexity, all constructed essentially from scratch and under enormous time pressures. The man given the task of commanding this force was General John J. Pershing, and from the moment that he arrived in France, Pershing became the center of the war's most consequential and most contentious arguments. The British and French commanders wanted American soldiers fed directly into their existing units. The logic was simple and, on its surface at least, quite reasonable. Their armies had 4 years of hard won experience fighting this specific kind of war. American troops had none. Plug the Americans into Allied divisions, the argument went, and you will get the benefit of their numbers without the risk of their inexperience. Pershing, however, refused, flatly, consistently, and at times furiously. His insistence on fielding an independent American army under American command, fighting as a coherent national force, was not mere pride, though pride was certainly part of it. Pershing believed correctly that amalgamating American troops into Allied units would effectively erase the United States as an independent military actor. It would also mean that American soldiers would be commanded by officers whose tactical doctrine had been shaped by years of failed offensive operations and catastrophic casualties. He was not wrong to be skeptical. But Pershing's stubbornness had a cost. In the desperate weeks of the German spring offensives, when Allied commanders were begging for any available reinforcements, the insistence on maintaining American organizational integrity delayed the deployment of troops who might have stabilized the line sooner. It was a decision made on principle, with strategic logic behind it, and it is still argued about by historians to this very day. When American forces did enter the fight in significant numbers in the summer and fall of 1918, the effect was undeniable. The numbers alone were staggering. By the summer of 1918, 10,000 American soldiers were arriving in France every single day. The sheer scale of that reinforcement, fresh troops, relatively well supplied, entering a war whose existing armies were depleted to the point of fragility, fundamentally altered the psychological and strategic calculus on both sides of the line. For the Germans, the arithmetic was becoming impossible. Every week that passed brought more Americans. Every offensive that failed to achieve a decisive breakthrough before those Americans arrived in full strength was a strategic defeat, regardless of the tactical result. German commander Erich Ludendorff would later write that the arrival of the Americans made the ultimate outcome inevitable. That once the spring offensives had failed to break the Allies before American forces could deploy in strength, Germany had lost the war. He was not writing in hindsight. The German military leadership understood this in real time. For the Allies, the effect was partially practical and partially psychological. The knowledge that American divisions were arriving, that the pool of available manpower was, for the first time in years, actually growing rather than shrinking, restored a kind of strategic confidence that had been absent from Allied planning for a very long time. The AEF fought its largest independent operation at the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, beginning in the late September of 1918, one of the largest military operations in American history, involving over 1 million of U.S. soldiers along the stretch of the Western Front in northeastern France. The fighting was brutal. American casualties in the Meuse-Argonne ran to more than 26,000 killed and over 95,000 wounded in just 47 days. It was not a clean, efficient victory. American units struggled with logistics, communication, and the brutal reality of fighting an experienced, deeply entrenched enemy. But the offensive succeeded. It cut key German supply lines, contributed directly to the collapse of German defensive positions, and helped push the war toward the armistice that came on November 11th of 1918. And here is where the legacy becomes a little complicated. The United States entered the war late, took casualties that were significant, but in reality a fraction of what France and Britain had absorbed over 4 years, and emerged from the conflict with its industrial base intact, its territory untouched, and its international prestige dramatically elevated. American commanders and politicians were quick to claim credit for the Allied victory, and there was genuine credit to claim. But the relationship between the AEF's contribution and the broader Allied effort was messier than the victory narrative allowed. British and French soldiers had held the line for years before the Americans arrived. The tactical knowledge that the AEF commanders often dismissed, the hard, terrible lessons about artillery coordination, logistics, and trench warfare, had been purchased by the Allies at an almost unimaginable cost in human life. American forces, for all their energy and numbers, made many of the same costly mistakes in 1918 that Allied armies had made in 1914 and 15, learning under fire what their allies had already learned the hard way. There's also the matter of what came after. Woodrow Wilson arrived at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, convinced that American intervention had won the war and that the United States was therefore positioned to shape the peace. He was not entirely wrong about the first part, but he was catastrophically wrong about the second. The Senate rejected the Treaty of Versailles. The United States retreated into isolationism. The international order that Wilson had imagined, anchored by American engagement and the League of Nations, collapsed before it could be built. The Doughboys had changed the war. Whether the war changed America, and whether America was willing to accept the responsibilities that came with its new power, well, was a different question entirely. One that would go unanswered for nearly 20 years, and another world war. The History Brief. Today on some history news, we're headed inside one of the most famous rooms in the world, the Sistine Chapel, where historians and conservationists are racing to protect one of the greatest artworks of the Renaissance. The problem, ironically, it's the millions of people who come to admire it. Experts at the Vatican museums have announced a new restoration project for the Last Judgment, the enormous fresco painted by Michelangelo on the chapel's altar. The masterpiece, completed in 1541, depicts the second coming of Christ and the final judgment of humanity, and covers nearly 2,000 square feet, packed with hundreds of figures swirling through heaven and hell. But after decades of heavy tourism, something unexpected has begun to appear on the painting: white blotches dulling the colors. According to restorers, the culprit is a chemical reaction that's triggered by the very people visiting the chapel. Microscopic particles in the air, combined with lactic acid from human sweat, have reacted with calcium in the plaster walls, creating a white salt called calcium lactate that slowly forms a film over the fresco. The mural was last cleaned in 1994, and now, more than 30 years later, the buildup has begun to obscure Michelangelo's famous use of the dramatic contrast between light and shadow that gives the figures their powerful three-dimensional appearance. Restorers are now carefully removing the buildup using an unexpectedly delicate technique. They place sheets of washi paper, a traditional Japanese paper made from plant fibers, directly onto the fresco. The paper is moistened with purified water, which dissolves the salt deposits. As the paper is lifted away, the residue comes with it, gradually revealing the colors underneath it. Remarkably, the chapel won't close during the restoration. Visitors will still be able to enter, while experts work behind a large protective screen printed with a full-scale reproduction of the fresco. The process is expected to take about 3 months. Even with limits of about 24,000 visitors per day, museum officials say that the salt deposits could eventually return. Future cleanings may need to become a routine part of preserving the artwork. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping make this little show such a mighty success. If you are enjoying this show and would like to help with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both links can be found on our website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.